How would you summarise Peter's contribution?
Well, I think we can think of the contribution of Peter, and the way I think about it is in terms of three refusals. The first refusal is the refusal to simplify the professional demands of primary English teaching. That of all of this talk that we have seen about the search for the one best practice, the search for what works, the notion of the complexity of what kids bring along to school that authors for Peter have written about so much. Let's not forget what they bring, the language, the culture that they bring. That all of these things can be pushed into a damagingly simplification, in terms of opposing ways of teaching these things. And it seems to me that Peter's been a force for refusing that, of simply saying that this won't work, and in the end these kids won't thank us for settling for some kind of simplified version of our professional responsibilities. The second, I think, is, as I've mentioned, with regard to refusing a simplified version of the knowledge base that informs primary English teaching. That there are many disciplines that can inform this, can enrich a notion of what we do, that can give teachers a stronger conceptualisation of the longer term consequences of good English teaching in the primary years. And those knowledge bases point to us, point to the ways in which applied linguistics and anthropology and ethnography and more sophisticated forms of cognitive psychology and sociology can talk to us about these sorts of things. And the third, I think, is with respect to refusing simplifications about the nature of the research that we will take on board. And that there is an issue here that there are always people in the research field and in the university field and teacher education that have invested very powerfully in particular orientations and that quite properly push those as far as they can to give the debate its best, its strongest form. And it seems to me, again, that Peter has had a nice position in terms of refusing to take a simplified answer and simply stick to that. And that there is too much research that is potentially highly informing across a range of methodologies, from tight experimental stuff, longitudinal stuff, ethnographic studies, and all of those sorts of things that can enrich one another when you have a sophisticated attitude about treating them as resources rather than telling you what to do. So how to summarise those things? When you look at the field, one of the things is to embrace that multiplicity in the field. And really, it's simply the case that I don't think we're in a position not to, given the changing nature of the clientele and the changing world that those kids are facing, that lies in wait for them when they come out of school. These are ongoing projects for us that we have to continue to debate. There's no end to the history, research, policy, professional development. History won't end in these things because the job is changing in its core business as we speak. So embracing that, I think, has been something that Peter has been good at, and as well producing materials that show a strong connection between English and language and literacy education broadly construed. And they haven't overinvested in a particular approach to that, but they have always tried to both lead and follow in providing teachers with good, usable materials. So the nice part about Peter has been its ability to remain anchored in the everyday practices of primary English teachers. And when you do that, you start to recognise that simplified solutions simply are not going to be a long-term investment for these folks. And that doesn't make life easier. It actually would be much easier to live in this much more simplified world. And it's an ongoing task, and you always face debates and you always face overinvestment by certain folks that you work with. And I think Peter has had a leading role in making that clear as well. A big part of Peter's role over the last 40 years has been in the production of materials, a real emphasis to and a commitment to producing high quality materials that are usable in the classroom. Rich materials that have pedagogical potential in the teaching of literature, language and literacy, and that combine those in a way that's entertaining and engaging. Materials that can bear extended scrutiny in a classroom. The kids can come back to that stuff. It doesn't wear out. There's always something in there that can be engaging, and that the deeper engagement with text in the primary years is an important thing. So that's been a landmark contribution, I think, as well. Peter's done some other things, or been part of movements that have done other things as well. And one of them is the resistance or scepticism about the ways in which some politicians and some media outlets want to catastrophise literacy education, want to say, what are these people doing? They're not doing it. It's a disaster. We're going downhill. There are always challenges, and we can always do better, and we know that. The kind of testing data that's around tells us that, well, if we're going downhill, pretty much most other people are as well. But also, just to remind ourselves that this is a complicated task that's not well captured in testing, which I guess is another particular thing we can talk about Peter's role, is to be, again, trying to develop, a more nuanced view of what assessment is and what the things that many standardised tests leave out. So the other versions of the story, that for the kids that we are dealing with, we have a particular challenge here in primary education with respect to English. It's one thing to be, a dentist or a golf pro in the world, one of the world's most culturally and linguistically complex societies. It's another to be a primary teacher and to be interested in the teaching of English. This is the front trench of acculturating kids into school life and into Australian life, into life as citizens and productive workers and so on. So it's a really key and complicated thing. And I guess the other thing to be said about it then is to understand that the next 40 years better be better, because the situation's not getting any simpler here in primary schools, and that, as Enright has pointed out and others, think about the new mainstream as being diverse and culturally and linguistically hybrid and physically and intellectually and emotionally mobile, okay? And that this is the new mainstream. There is nothing to hearken back to necessarily that's not productive here, that we can't look back, because even if we could find the golden age of literacy, and there wasn't one, we would not find the tools and the ideas and the optimism and the need for experimentation and the need for teachers' participation in research and policy development and so on that we need to have, that needs to be the platform we work on for the next 40 years. This is the ongoing challenge. The first 40 years is a good start, okay? It's a warm-up for the real bit that happens next.